Okay, we're about to start our panel on science communication for the new media era. And I get the pleasure of introducing Rich, who's become a really strong ally and friend. And we're just so thankful for all Rich's involvement as also John's in our helping us shape the whole media fellowship and our direction with where we're going with it. So I'm very excited for this panel where we will talk about meeting people where they are and changing the media landscape. I think we're all aware that the media landscape is and has really changed. So I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this session, Rich Stone. We're grateful to have Rich's expertise on our Media Advisory Council for the past 3 years. He's been invaluable, as I said, in shaping our Media Fellowship program, helps evaluate our, when we have our applicants come in, we weed them out and then we pull in our advisors and they help us go through weeding out more and interviewing. So it's a big commitment and we're very grateful for that. Rich also contributes to Science as its senior international correspondent with a focus on Asia, as well as featured datelines from challenging reporting environments such as Cuba, Iran, and North Korea, and he's not long back from Ukraine and hiding in basements to avoid drone bombings. He serves as a special advisor, science diplomacy and engagement for the Human Frontier Science Program Organization. Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Sue. And what Sue does not know is my secret plan is starting to really take hold now, to take over NOVA with journalists. You'll see there's so many journalists in the room now. It's great. I think we almost have parity. Next year we'll have parity. This is a really exciting panel for me personally because I expect to learn a lot. I know very little about social media, but we're going to have a great panel to talk about this and actually really brainstorm with you all about how we can get more accurate scientific information to the general public, to other audiences via social media, what strategies we can use. We'll learn from our panelists, their experiences, and then really brainstorm. This should be interactive discussion. We're going to pivot to that as soon as possible. But first I'm going to introduce our stellar panel. 2 people here live and in person, and 1 calling in over Zoom because of the storm marooned her in Boston. So we're going to start with Ashwath Narayanan. He is co-founder and CEO of Social Currant. It's a Washington, D.C. based enterprise that matches social impact organizations and nonprofits with the influencers and content creators across social media platforms. He founded Social Currant while a student at the George Washington University and continues to manage the Furman platform after graduating in May 2022. Prior to Social Currant, Ashwath spent time working with the startup and nonprofit space in Washington. He was named on the top 25, under 25 DC Inno list. Is Inno short for innovation? Or yeah. Has spoken at events across the country and is on a mission to empower creators. The second person here with us in person, Julie Rovner, Chief Washington Correspondent for Kaiser Family Foundation Health News. Julie hosts the KFF Health News weekly health policy news podcast, What the Health. Previously, she spent 16 years.
Recording in progress.
Oh, okay. In that case, I better watch what I say. She spent 16 years as a health policy correspondent for NPR, where she helped lead the network's coverage of the passage and implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Julie is the author of the critically praised reference book, Healthcare Politics and Policy A to Z, now in its 3rd edition. In 2005, she received the National Press Foundation's Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for distinguished reporting on Congress. Before working at NPR, Julie, a University of Michigan graduate, covered health policy for national journals, Congress Daily, and for Congressional Quarterly, among other organizations. Joining us via video link, all the way from Boston, storm-swept Boston, is Amanda Yarnell, Senior Director of the T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Center for Health Communication, a lecturer in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Harvard. Under Amanda's leadership, the Center for Health Communication launched a Public Health Creators Program, which equips and inspires influential creators to spread evidence-based health information on social media. Using the program as a natural laboratory, her team conducts interdisciplinary, creator-engaged research to study how creators are reshaping health narratives and health behaviors and what it means for society. In this work, Amanda leverages 2 decades of experience in science and health journalism, media product development, and audience engagement. Before joining Harvard's faculty, she worked as a science journalist and news executive at Chemical and Engineering News, an award-winning nonprofit science news outlet published by the American Chemical Society. She currently serves on the board of Science to People, a nonprofit developing an AI research assistant for creators. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Chemistry from Johns Hopkins and a Master's of Science in Chemistry from MIT. So I'm going to put down a laptop, join this panel over here. And I think, Ashwath, why don't we start off with you, say a few words about your organization and how you engage with social media.
Awesome. Hey, folks, it's wonderful to be here. My name's Ashwath. I'm one of the co-founders at Social Currant. And I'll tell you a little bit about sort of how we got started and the work we do, and then hopefully we can get into it in the Q&A. So I started Social Current about 5 years ago when I was in my sophomore year at GW with the goal of bringing young people into impact spaces, because I was in a lot of nonprofit, a lot of impact spaces, and they were trying to figure out how to reach young people without any young people there. Didn't make a ton of sense. And so I was like, I'm going to start an agency. We're going to help people figure out TikTok, and we'll see how it goes. And so we started really as a social media marketing company, helping nonprofits get on TikTok and sort of create content. And around the time we started, this nonprofit reached out. They're called Community Change. They're a national organization that does a lot of sort of organizing work for low-income communities. And at that time, the child tax credit had passed. And they were trying to figure out how they could sort of get information about the child tax credit into the hands of people who could access it, because a lot of the conversation about the child tax credit was being talked online, in the press, and sort of in a lot of DC spaces. And you know, those folks weren't going to actually use it or access it. And so they came to us sort of with the goal of like, hey, how do we get the child tax credit in front of more people? How we just want to sort of promote this policy. And we were like, instead of taking your dollars and giving it to Mark Zuckerberg, can we hire sort of content creators online who've gotten the tax policy themselves and invest in them to talk about sort of how they used it and encourage other people to use it. And so over the course of 2 weeks, we helped them find about 15 content creators who had nothing in common other than the fact that they'd all gotten the policy or were part of families that got the policy. And we paid them to do a video literally saying, this is what I used the tax credit for, you should use it too. Go to this White House website with the resources on the policy. Our goal was to reach 100,000 people within 24 hours. We reached almost 400,000 people and sent 10,000 people to a resource page with more information on the child tax credit. And that's when we really saw the power of content creators, and we saw the power of investing in people with lived experiences around issues. And since then have been helping advocacy orgs, nonprofits, work with content creators to reach audiences more effectively. I think sort of one of the foundations of the work we do is the fact that 2 in 5 Gen Zers gets their news primarily from TikTok influencers. You know, this number is only going to rise, and as we think about how we can get news in front of audiences more effectively, we have to think about where they're currently getting their information, which in most cases is from an influencer online. And so a lot of the work we do is try to figure out how we can get health-backed info, research-backed info, policy-backed info in front of audiences, while also building an ecosystem of educated creators that care about these issues, and investing in creators to talk about these issues more effectively. So that's what we do. I'm happy to go into in more detail as we go through the Q&A.
Right. Julie.
Great. I don't want to, I'm probably older than your parent. I've been a journalist for almost 40 years now. I have served, you heard in the intro, I've written for general audiences, specialized audiences, political audiences. I started out, in print journalism, and in the 70s when I started out in print journalism, that was the thing. There was like print and TV and not much else. And then I did radio, and obviously I'm, a big adopter of social media. Basically what I consider myself these days is an educator. I want people to understand about health policy because I want them to be able to make good decisions. And I feel like KFF is a great platform from which to do that. We are no longer, by the way, the Kaiser Family Foundation. We have not been for about 4 years because we are not and never were affiliated with Kaiser Permanente, and we've not been a foundation for about 10 years. We're actually, legally, I believe we are a public charity now. So we are now just KFF, and we are a healthcare information news organization. We do our analysis and polling is one part of the organization. KFF Health News, the other sort of part of the organization. We're now a newsroom of more than 50 people, which when I joined 10 years ago, it was only about 10. And we basically do health policy journalism in every possible way. So we have an amazing social media team. I don't take credit for a lot of the things we do on social media, but one of the things that I've been doing for the past couple of years are TikTok videos with one of my corgis, because I know that corgis are very popular online. So how better to get healthcare information than, as one of our social media people put it to me one day when I was just doing one of those videos where I sit and talk to the camera. She said, why don't we have Julie explain it to Aspen? And a series was born. So I think we have one, the most recent one that we're going to show you.
Hey Aspen, did you see that the federal government has shut down? A shutdown happens when Congress fails to approve a plan for government spending for the fiscal year, which starts October 1st. But not everything shuts down. It's complicated, but here's how it could play out for the nation's top health agencies. There are two kinds of government spending: discretionary and mandatory. Discretionary programs are funded under the annual appropriations process, and they stop functioning if lawmakers can't agree on how to pay for them. Mandatory programs, which are funded automatically under existing laws, aren't directly affected when the government shuts down. That includes the big health programs, Medicare and Medicaid. Even discretionary programs that have their funding cut off don't stop entirely. Many workers at the CDC and the NIH, for example, are required to work anyway. They just won't get paid until the shutdown ends. And some programs are untouched because they get funded completely differently. Drug reviewers at the FDA, for example, are funded by fees paid by drug companies. But a shutdown still means lots of people won't get health services. Eventually, places like community health centers will run out of funding and may have to close. How bad it gets depends on how long it lasts. Hey Aspen, did you see that the federal government has shut down? A shutdown happens when Congress fails to approve a plan for government spending.
Thank you. It takes a village. I obviously didn't do all of that myself, although I did train the dog. But it is, you laugh, but it's as we've heard, this is how young people get information, and they're more likely to do that than to read a 45-inch story in the New York Times, even a 45-inch story written by me in the New York Times. So we're sort of doing our best, and I'm a huge fan of how social media can better be used to help inform people, and I'm hoping to learn from all of you.
Well, Aspen is a natural. I'm really jealous. My Scotty could never pull that off, I'm sure. Well, let's hear from Amanda now in Boston.
Yeah, great. Very sorry that I can't be there with you in person. The weather conspired against me. But as Richard said, I'm a scientist by training, but then spent a couple decades working in science journalism before being recruited here to Harvard Chan School of Public Health. I was asked to come here to reboot the Center for Health Communication on the tail end of the COVID pandemic. Under my leadership, we've been thinking about how we support three groups of people who I think are really critical to public health. The first one is the people you'd expect: public health students, faculty, professionals. That's something that was really hard for me to watch during leading a newsroom during COVID. I watched so many people in public health struggle to communicate effectively. And training in public health hasn't traditionally included the kinds of communication skills that public health professionals need today, including at Harvard. So we've worked to reimagine what that might look like here at Harvard, and then also how to scale those supports. But we're also very interested in supporting people that you might not think of, public health leaders who are increasingly the ones who connect communities with the information that they need to make health decisions, whether it's for themselves or whether it's for their families. One of those groups is journalists. The center has been around for 4 decades and has actually a long history of supporting health journalists, including once upon a time running a prestigious journalist in residence program that brought people like Linda Villarosa, who's now at the New York Times, and Victor Cohn to Harvard. We recently reimagined that kind of tradition for today's world by bringing in the Health Coverage Fellowship, which is a prestigious health journalism program with a very long and storied 24-year history to the center. It counts nearly 300 of the nation's leading health journalists as alums. But today we live in a world where 1 in 2 of us get our health information from social media. As Ashwath said, increasingly from creators working on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. So the center has paid a lot of attention, special attention in the last couple of years under my leadership, to how we might equip and inspire those creators to spread evidence-based health information and really protect the health of their digital communities. Part of the inspiration for that focus was my own experience running a newsroom, realizing that there were creators working on platforms like Instagram that were doing a much better job getting people to connect with the kind of reporting that my team of professional journalists, 50 of them, were putting out every week. So we built things like an ambassador program. We tried to learn from them to reimagine what our newsroom's presence on those platforms might look like. But the inspiration for our work here at Harvard in the last couple of years really crystallized when I learned about the center's beginnings 4 decades ago. It got its start in the 80s. Our founding director gathered the heads of the leading TV and Hollywood studios and convinced them that they could support public health by weaving healthy messages into their entertainment programming, into things like shows like Cheers, for example, which is set here in Boston. His efforts are the reason that you're all familiar with the term designated driver. The center's work to get that idea into American culture, really through entertainment and the storylines of popular TV shows like Cheers, has been credited with saving hundreds of thousands of lives that might otherwise have been lost to drunk driving. But today, when I landed here at Harvard, where nobody is watching the same primetime TV shows anymore. We're not even watching TV at all. Instead, we're often watching TikTok. So thinking through what that strategy might look like in today's media environment, we built a program for creators. But since I'm a scientist and we're an academic center sitting at Harvard, we launched it as a randomized controlled trial on TikTok. We piloted the idea in mental health. It's the most common type of health information that users see on TikTok. That was prime reason. And showed via this randomized controlled trial that very simple health communication toolkits, when put in the hands of creators, they do 2 things. First, they increase the amount of evidence-based health content on a platform like TikTok. But we also find that these toolkits can improve the health of the mental health discourse on that content, and even teach people, mental health-based skills. We found that creators exposed to our mental health communication toolkits they're significantly more likely to share evidence-based mental health content compared to creators who are not exposed to those materials. And then we built a series of large language models to analyze the hundreds of thousands of comments left on the videos in that trial, and found that when creators used our toolkits to make TikTok videos, it significantly increased the chance that commenters were motivated to seek out evidence-based mental health information. Since then, we've also done a survey-based RCT where we work with creators to make the control and treatment arms of those studies very similar to what they would make on TikTok, using our supports and some not, and find that when they use our supports, they also can teach people just in a 90-second video how to, for example, use more evidence-based ways of supporting the mental health of their friends. So overall, we've been designing these kinds of toolkits, these kinds of supports for creators to make it easy for creators to share evidence-based mental health content. And we find that they're simple, effective, and importantly, a really scalable strategy for connecting creators to the evidence. As Ashwath said, to help make sure that there's an educated creator population out there that's committed to their community's health. We don't think that this is anything specific to mental health, and in fact, we've been expanding outside that area. And now, on the basis of those results, we've been working to get those toolkits to more and more creators in order to really improve, in this case, the mental health discourse, but we think more generally the health discourse on these kinds of platforms. So we've opened up our programs that were originally built as these randomized controlled trials, built partnerships with organizations like Ashwath's, and begun to scale access to these kinds of supports. Toolkits, briefings on a wide range of mental health topics, as well as higher touch things such as in-person events designed to build cohorts of champions in these kinds of spaces. And in just that first year of scaling, we have now more than 1,400 creators in the program, and as I hinted, are expanding beyond mental health in the year ahead via a really exciting new partnership with Meharry School of Global Health that's going to bring thousands more of creators into the program and test new kinds of creator supports. And then meanwhile, happy to talk about during the course of this conversation, we continue to use that program as a living laboratory to understand how creators are shaping health information ecosystems and also shaping consumers' health decisions.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to start out, not to dwell on the negative, but to at least put a little kind of flesh on what we're confronting here. As you're all aware, the Trump administration has been working with influencers to get its message out. I'd like to get the panelists' views on the extent of misinformation and disinformation in the areas that you're concerned with, how broad and how deep it is, and if you have a particular example that you find most egregious. I'm sorry, Rochelle, we're going to switch to positive very soon, so if you want to just close your ears for a few minutes. But so Ashwath, do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I spend a lot of time thinking about that, and a lot of what we've built is to counter a lot of sort of the ecosystem on the right. Since 2016, the right has invested billions of dollars into a content creator ecosystem, specifically focused on sharing information, and specifically sort of in the area of health. I think it's never been easier to share misinformation than ever before. You can record a video in less than 30 seconds and share something crazy about health, and people will sometimes believe it. And I think we saw this specifically in this area around the nomination of RFK Jr. And sort of how, and there's some good articles about how sort of they have worked with a lot of parent creators to build sort of the MAHA pipeline, Make America Healthy Again, sharing misinformation, sort of generally creating distrust in health institutions. And so I think the right has really been good at sort of investing in creators, not just overall, but specifically around building a pipeline of audiences that do not trust health information online, which eventually sort of led to his nomination. And so I think that's an important example of how you can use these platforms, how you can use creators to create distrust online.
Julie?
Yeah, as someone who's generally big fan of social media, I show my dog. So I have a dog community, I have a horse community, I have a health policy community, I have a football community. I mean, it's great. But I think one of the things that COVID really taught me is that I was very naive and I thought that there was a lot of misinformation, and I underestimated how much actual disinformation there was, how much purposeful wrong information, and sort of the ease with which now people, basically know they're making something up and putting it out into the universe for the purpose of basically causing trouble. And obviously we saw that in COVID over and over again. And I, having spent a long time talking with people in public health about communication skills, I was really frustrated. And if you listen to the podcast during those years, I mean, almost every week, I would just sort of wax poetic about where are these public health professionals who I know actually did get taught about communication, because I helped teach some of them. Why are they unable to compete with the people that are making stuff up? And I think it's, frankly, in the years sort of since the pandemic, it's gotten worse because, as you say, it's become basically institutionalized. So now we have institutionalized disinformation, and that's even harder, I think, to combat than just people being wrong.
Yeah, scary. So kicking over to you, Amanda. Now, Amanda cannot see us, but we can see you. So
I can see you,
if you ever...
sort of, from afar.
Oh, okay.
I can see you all from afar.
Oh, you can? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that's great, yeah.
Yeah, I would say two things. So I think that the skills that are required to communicate in today's environment are not the skills that many people, certainly many people in institutional public health, possess at this time. And I think that's where, it goes to Ashwath's point. I mean, public health has not invested in this space. Right? And by public health, I'm speaking very broadly here. People who care about health and healthy information ecosystems have not invested in this space, and they've basically given it up for a while, and now we are reaping that. I think we're also about, I think another thing to point to is Casey Means is about to be the Surgeon General, somebody who's been cultivated in this space for quite a long time, and is going to come in with a bigger platform than any Surgeon General has ever had, right? Supposed to be the nation's voice on public health. So I think what we're up against is very, very large. And I think, the work that Ashwath's been doing and the programming that we've been working on at the center has really been in the same vein there, right? We are trying to figure out, what does the alternative look like? How do you marshal a different kind of group of people, cohort, interested in protecting community health and rebuilding that kind of trust.
Yeah, so people generally love conspiracy theories. People love great stories, regardless of whether they're rooted in truth. In a sense, the purveyors of mis and disinformation are appealing to human nature. So that's a pretty kind of daunting thing to go up against. But let's talk about approaches that we can try and to exploit to get accurate information out there, perhaps using some of the same tools, good storytelling, for example. Ashwath?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the foundation of all the work we do is a belief in people. Like, there are so many people that care about the importance of public health information. There are so many people that care about the fact that there should be more health-backed research out there. And so I think a lot of the work we try to do is find those people who are already fighting the fight online and try to figure out how we can give them the resources to continue doing it, whether that's compensation, whether that's, a support ecosystem, whether that's research, whether that's access to experts. I think a lot of sort of our work is focused on how do we find the people that have already figured out how to capture audiences, and then how do we equip them with the information to continue to capture those audiences, but also make sure it's easy for them to do it. They're not, sitting on Google and figuring this out all by themselves. They have access to institutions like Harvard. They have access to researchers. They have access to journalists who can help them find the information and share it more effectively. So I think as we think about tactics, I think we have to think about how we can invest in our people around the health ecosystem and help them continue to do this work.
Yeah, I wish that we could sort of be more organized, the way the right is, about doing this. We're out there on our own. We're a health information purveyor, basically, and we purvey information in a variety of ways. But we're a pretty small voice in a pretty big ocean, and it's hard. You get drowned out. We don't work a lot with outside creators, although perhaps we should, because we're trying to create our own audiences, which obviously we can't, compete with people who have, hundreds of thousands or millions of viewers. But I do think it's sort of the coming challenge is to capture this universe, because as you point out, this is where people are getting their information. So if your job is putting out information, you better go to where people are getting it.
Amanda?
Yeah, I would say that when I first started this program, one of my secret interests, maybe not so secret to certain people, was really to start building that kind of collaborative. We had 15 creators in last week to Harvard for a summit. These are all mental health folks, 50 million in collective reach, and have been thinking about what can we equip them with. Better techniques for storytelling, evidence-backed techniques for storytelling that is more effective at taking you from a story of a personal story to one that actually activates a community for change. Framing strategies, how to use numbers. So we've been thinking a lot about what are the sort of things that we can help equip them with. But then I also think, it really also comes down to making sure that they can stay in that kind of work, that they have the financial support, the institutional support to do it. I think the business of keeping up these kinds of communities is very different. And journalists, right, who do this every day, I did this for many years, but I had healthcare. I had a community of colleagues who would help me through having an angry reader write me a note. You had all these kinds of other kinds of supports that newsrooms and journalism as an institution has created, and they really just don't exist for creators. So I think that there's some amount of education that's important, but also some thinking through of what is that institutional structure and how can we in public health support it, so that the folks who really do care about the health of their communities can continue to support it.
So we'll do one more round with the panel and then throw it open to questions from the room, so get ready. And during the COVID pandemic, of course, there was a lot of disinformation about vaccine safety. That's only gotten worse with resurrecting very specious studies linking autism, for example, with certain ingredients in vaccine preparations that had been debunked before, but has resurfaced. With that in mind, how do you convey the importance of vaccination in this climate today? How do you cut through the noise? Maybe we'll start with Amanda this time, go in reverse order.
Yeah, I think vaccines are a really hard topic because obviously the resistance is very entrenched, right, and built up. And so I think that's a very, very long road. We're very interested in that topic for obvious reasons, but I think we're more likely to think about it in, how do we support parenting creators and the questions that they might have about health, right? And sort of build it that way. I think that's one thing we're really thinking about. The other thing we're thinking about is our programs are really designed to support not only folks who are coming from lived experience, right, sharing their own health struggles or concerns and building a community around them, but also, of course, folks coming from health. There are a wide range of folks coming from health professional backgrounds. So I think the other thing we've been thinking about is how do we then bring that into folks who are training as pediatricians, OBGYNs, right? Physicians continue to be, it's unfortunately declining as interest in all sort of expertise and institutions, but how do we help them learn from the creators who are using really specific strategies around building trust with their audience, which maybe we can talk about in a separate question around that. So I'm thinking about it as not head on, but sort of two parts. How do you equip people in healthcare to do a better job, and what can they learn from creators in these spaces? How can they share creators that they trust with their audiences in response to patient questions, and then how can you support parenting creators in a less heavy-handed way than like finger waving at them about why they should understand what vaccines do for public health and for all of us to protect us.
I think we're in a very new place. I mean, I've covered vaccine resistance since the 1990s, since the original, now debunked Lancet article came out. And I can tell you, I mean, there have always been vaccine resistant populations, and they tend to be on the far left and the far right. So they're both, very liberal and very conservative, sort of very libertarian. And yet, our crack polling staff at KFF had a poll out, I believe it was just last week, that showed that the vast majority of the public is not vaccine resistant. What's different now is that the people who are running our public health infrastructure are. And as we point out, possibly we're going to have a new Surgeon General. We certainly already have a head of HHS, and now sort of newly installed people at the FDA and the CDC who are, as we like to say, if not vaccine resistant, vaccine skeptical. And it poses, I think, a whole different challenge, certainly for journalists, and I think also for creators, as to, normally you get to just turn to the people in charge and say, these are the people who are in charge of this and you should believe in them. But now you have to turn and say, these are the people who are in charge of this and you probably shouldn't believe them. And I'm, for one, still grappling with actually how to do that.
Yeah, I think I have two answers to this. I think one is a harder one. I think we need the platforms to step up. I think a lot of these platforms are how get to decide how information is distributed, and sort of part of me doesn't know how we distribute more health back info without the platforms playing a part, and I don't know if we get any of that in the next 4 years. I think the second answer is, I think, like when we think about how sort of the Make America Healthy Again pipeline grew, it was not about political spaces, it was about adjacent spaces. It wasn't about health spaces, it was about adjacent spaces. It was about parenting, it was about, creators that are sharing like food and like all sorts of like niches that you could see coming into health but weren't directly talking about health. And I think we need to start thinking about sort of how we support and build the health ecosystem, but they're all reaching folks that are already bought in. How do we sort of reach audiences before they come into health? And how do we work with comedy, fashion, lifestyle, parenting? Like, how do we work with ecosystems of creators that aren't in any ways experts around health, but people are coming to them for information? How do we sort of equip them with the right information around vaccines, around any other health topic, so that folks can reach them, but they're also coming with trust with their audience, because a lot of audiences might not trust health institutions, but they do trust these creators. So is there a world where health institutions are partnering with these adjacent creators and then helping them sort of talk about important information in a more sort of accessible way, which is a lot of the work Amanda is doing around how do we equip these creators with information, because their audiences are coming to them every day with asks and they're not equipped to sort of support them.
So love it or hate it, TikTok is here to stay, as we saw from recent news. A deal is either in the works or completed for the transfer of TikTok. And
Barron Trump's going to be on the board, allegedly.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, so how do we use the platform? How do we build audiences and get accurate scientific info out there? Why don't we throw it open to the room? I bet there's a lot of questions. We have a roving mic. I'm going to let Trent just pick out people.
Hey, thank you for this wonderful panel. I do think the work you're all doing is so important. And my question is, or maybe my concern is that still the messages, better messages, data-informed messages, end up in separated like echo chambers. So are there ways that you're able to recruit influencers and creators that speak to very kind of different, diverse audiences? Like, what are your strategies to do that?
So I'm going to let the panelists pipe up when they feel ready to answer. Who wants to go first?
I don't. I'm not part of our social media team, so I actually don't have an answer to that question.
Yeah, a lot of the work we do is like trying to figure out how we can get sort of non-health, non-political creators into our network. And so some of that is trying to meet creators where they are. Some of that is like events around the country where we'll bring together 15, 20 creators and talk to them about like how they should be using their platform for good without any specifics about issues, like sort of opening the door to having these conversations. We do briefings for talent agencies where we'll like help a talent agency understand why it's important for their creators to work with nonprofits, impact organizations. We've got like briefings, resources. We'll go to creator events like VidCon, VidSummit, and we'll sort of talk to creators about why they should be sort of using their platforms. And a lot of this focuses on like comedy creators or like lifestyle. Like we don't do any sort of creators that are actively spreading mis and disinformation, but we do a lot, like we do engage a lot of creators that like have never talked about anything because they haven't been equipped to, no one's asked them to, and they don't feel confident in their ability to. And so a lot of it's like connecting them with an expert. Like when you're talking to someone at Harvard that's done research in this space, you're more likely to talk about that research because you know that someone has done a lot of work to put this together, and you're not like, it's not your responsibility necessarily to do that work because you can work with someone. So a lot of it's like also like thinking through the resources folks need to be able to do this work.
Yeah, I would say all of what Ashwath said, and I would add in part some of what we've found when we convene folks is that creators can also do that to creators too, right? Like we have some responsibility to offer support, but simply bringing those people together and helping them knit together some different kinds of collaborations or just networks within creators in different spaces can help bridge some of that. But I also think this is another place where platforms play a role, and what we've been doing is using our program to elevate those concerns that creators have around this particular space up into product teams and safety teams within the platforms. That's a long road, but I think that's a necessity.
Okay.
So I was in middle school and high school in the aughts, like kind of through this sea change of where information came from. It was like the rise of Wikipedia and obviously social media, and there was like a lot of messaging around sources of information and how to identify trustworthy sources of information. And I think a lot of that was informed by, educators who had lived through the prior era and stuff, but like there was just a lot of it. And so I feel like I entered adulthood and like college, late teenage years, equipped to like know the truth when I saw it, right? And it sounds like what we're talking about is kind of like an utter lack of that. So I wonder if like, it seems like we're talking about solutions or at least a counter to misinformation and disinformation in essentially like drowning it out, like making sure there's more right in the scroll than wrong in the scroll. But I wonder if like, are there strategies to kind of go back to the root and like, does it mean educating educators? Like what, I don't know, how do we get messaging out around like how to know the truth when you see it, even if that's on TikTok? Because clearly it is, like that's where we are.
I mean, I generally think there needs to be more media literacy as a whole. I think we need to figure out how to teach media literacy from a social media perspective in schools. I don't know how we do that without policy level change when the Department of Education is working with Prager University. Like, I don't know how, but I do think we need it broadly, and I do think that helps then think through how to consume information online.
I would say I think we need to go even more basic than that. I'm become a big fan of teaching civics in school. I think people no longer have sort of this concept that I grew up with. I mean, I went to elementary and junior high school in the 60s and 70s. I'm a late boomer. And, we learned an awful lot of things about representative democracy and, and the separation of powers and things that I'm kind of horrified to discover people in college have no idea of, stuff that I learned in the 6th grade. And we're really not doing that. We're busy. I mean, it's great to learn to code, although now AI is going to do it for you. But, I think there's a lot of things that we used to teach, and I had no idea that, are they really no longer teaching any of this media literacy? I remember it being a big deal in the aughts, as we were having this changeover, and the idea that people are not being taught how to figure out whether information is coming from a trustworthy source is pretty terrifying.
I would just add, Kate, I'm convinced we can't drown out the noise from the right, that the only way forward is just really good storytelling, personalizing the story, making people care that way, and hopefully you can get through to people.
Can I also say, it's not just from the right. A lot of it is capitalism. A lot of it is people selling stuff. I think there's probably more of people selling stuff than there is people pushing a political point of view.
Yeah, okay. So I'll amend that and say we should start selling stuff. So what's the situation in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I just came back from Ottawa, where we, as part of the Canadian Health Food Association, are lobbying the government about health language and flourishing language in parts of acts. I own a health food store, so I just want to point some context out that I think is really important for this question. I see this every single week. I work the floor of my health food store. You're talking about health promotion, but you really need to expand what you're talking about is in the wellness spheres, okay? And there's a whole distribution of wellness spheres. Let's go back in time just a little bit. You remember Kevin Trudeau. Who is Kevin Trudeau? What was the title of his book? Health Secrets They Don't Want You to Know. Right? You remember that? He ended up going to jail for that. The Commerce Commission or something, whatever, in the US eventually went after him for claims. Now let's dial this back a little bit more. I actually wrote a paper on this that was published in a very, 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 very obscure journal. But do you know the first functional food sold in North America? Claims were in JAMA, 1912. It's grapefruit. First functional food in North America. America has a rich history of the communication of health information. The road to Wellville, the sanatoriums, Battle Creek, Michigan, the Kellogg's. This is embedded in the tapestry of how Americans think. And you have other hot centers around the world now that have picked up this wellness piece. Australia is another one. One of the, we don't know if they're validated yet, but the blue zones are something people talk about. We need to be aware of this. Loma Linda, California is one of those blue zones. It's in America. It's a Seventh-day Adventist community. They're vegetarians. They believe in getting outside. They believe in nature therapy. There's a whole bunch of stuff, too, about religion that intersects with wellness, right? The Mormons, the Seventh-day Adventists, don't drink, don't smoke, halal meats, the way things are slaughtered. It's not merely just health promotion about vaccines. It's the ecosystems of care by which we look after each other, and people have been let down. Diabetes is increasing, cardiovascular disease is increasing, colorectal cancer is rising at a rate in 29 to 42-year-olds. I'm worried about my kids. We have big problems, and they're superficially and topologically thrown around as political sound bites. It's not right. And we need to dig deep into humanity and find out why Susan didn't just say the Nova Center for Planetary Health, but planetary consciousness and global flourishing. And we need to understand what that intersection is. So, sorry, thank you for the floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm one of those public health people who, used to have to disabuse my faculty of, it actually is useful to talk to journalists. Yeah, sometimes they'll get it wrong, and sometimes they'll get it right and do important stuff. But
Thank you.
So you remember books? So a number of years ago, one of the founders of Move On wrote a book, and he related a story in which he asked two of his friends to tell him something about Exxon. okay? And one came back with, an environmental disaster story, and the other search came back with the financial report. And now fast forward away from books to TikTok, and sort of rule out the influencers who are monetizing some product, okay? How can we, and I assume there must be a lot of fragmentation and polarization of the audiences for TikTok. So yesterday we heard from John Powell, and John Powell talked about bridging and othering, and a lot of wisdom about how we get people to bond and bridge. And I'm wondering what might be the mechanisms that we can use in social media to bring people together rather than pushing people apart.
Amanda, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most creators, at least the ones that we're interested in reaching, and I think there's just as in creators is a wide range of people, just as journalists are a wide range of people, scientists are a wide range of people, politicians are a wide range of people. But I think the folks that we're most interested in interacting with are community minded. And I think that they are interested in and committed to bridging those divides within their communities. So to me, it's more about when I say meeting a creator where they are, I really am thinking about that creator is already trying to meet their audience where they are. So thinking about how you can equip them to answer the questions that their audiences have. I think, I run a separate sort of research project that's looking at like validating creator and content features that drive trust, right? It's a big gap in our understanding. It kind of underlies a lot of what we're talking about and prevents, high quality information often having the impact that it ought to in the media environment. And one of the things that we really think about is how creators respond to their audiences, right? How they entertain disagreement, how they show process in step-by-step detail in a way that I think a lot of institutions, journalistic and public health, haven't learned to do in a social media environment. There's a lot I think that we can do to support those kinds of creators and then also learn from them.
Ashwath, I would like to also add to that question. How much of TikTok really is solely based on the personality of the creators versus topical? Like, are there communities of people who are interested in just diverse voices on a particular topic, or are they simply following people who kind of resonate with their point of view?
I definitely think it's a mix of both, because you have spaces on TikTok like Book Talk, or like there's a lot of like community spaces online around shared topics. And the way the For You page works is it's giving you information that they think you will be interested in. A lot of times it's from creators that you're interested in, but a lot of times it's topics. And so there are a lot of sort of shared spaces around topics online. I do think as we think about like how sort of to bring more a sense of community online, I think some of it is like deciding who we work with and helping them set norms around how their community organizes itself. I think some of it is like platforms, like these platforms are built to, promote content that does get a reaction. And in most cases, it's a bad reaction. And so I think some of it's platforms. I think the other one, the final one, is sort of like thinking through how we can use online spaces to build in-person spaces, how we can work with creators to organize their communities and meet them online, but then take them offline. A space like I think more young people than ever before have not had a space that's not work or social media, and so how can we like help work with creators to sort of gather their audiences through events or whatever it is outside of the platforms to build more community? I think is something we should be thinking about, and also goes back to that point around sort of more people need to be in nature, more people need to see other people in person, not online. And so I think creators can be one way to do that, but I also think we need broadly more investment in sort of public spaces.
Would you advocate bringing a few creators to this meeting?
Yes, always advocating to bring creators to in-person spaces.
Who has the mic next here? Okay.
Thank you so much. For somebody who doesn't use social media, it's good to hear these efforts are being made. So talking about science, we also know that there is critical science emerging to underscore the negative impact social media has on our minds, bodies, and I think we have established we can talk about the soul in this space, also our soul. So my question is, you all really understand this landscape. We also know that there is immense monopoly power with 4 or 5 big tech corporations owning everything that you all talk about, good, bad, the ugly. So how do you see your role in actually fighting the algorithms? Because that's where I think the essence of this addictive nature of social media lies. Also, how do you feel about, yes, working with influencers, but working also within the architecture of already established practices of social media that have undermined human rights, have fueled genocides, and so on and so forth? And what do you see your role in making social media more democratic, algorithms more humane, and the entire ecosystem much more transparent and accountable?
Yeah, I think in many ways we don't have a choice, because not being on these platforms doesn't mean that things stop. It means that we're backslide. Like we're already losing, and not investing in these platforms with research-backed info means that, it's only going to get worse. So I think in many ways we don't have a choice. I do think sort of on a more political level, there are, like the current administration has these social media billionaires in the White House. The previous administration did not. And so I do think there's politically we need to be able to push for tech policy, and only one party is doing anything. They're not doing enough, but doing something. And so some of what we do is try to, we work in politics to make sure we have a government that can regulate social media companies for the better. But I think the final one is, I do think at a macro level, social media and the algorithms sort of decide how information is distributed, but in the micro level, these creators do in their own communities. And so if we can find the creators that are value aligned, if we can find the creators that care about sort of intentional communities, investing in them will help us build a safer social media space. Again, I think that's sort of in a more sort of tangible level for us, because we can't, unfortunately change some of these tech platforms, but we have done a lot of tech accountability work to push for policy change.
Do your corgis have any qualms about working with big tech?
No, they work for cheese sticks. I was going to say on Earth 2, I would have suggested that maybe people invest some time and effort into educating legislators in Congress about the importance of regulating tech. But on Earth 1, Congress has basically ceded all of its power. So I'm wondering if maybe that is not the best use of resources at the moment.
Yeah, I have I think there are 3 pressure points, right, that are going to change big tech and algorithms. One is similar to Ashwath's last point. It's creators themselves that underpin the platform. And so the more we can do to knit folks who care about that, particularly mental health creators who know quite a lot about the effects of social media on their own mental health and are actually quite concerned about it, but individually they have no power to influence. Collectively they may. And so I think that an institution like Harvard has a role and a responsibility there to help elevate some of those concerns, that you sort of articulate and elevate those concerns collectively for creators. That's one. The second pressure point is obviously legislation. I have, like Julie, fairly little confidence in the current situation. To me, the third is actually the legal system. We haven't talked about that. I was part of a paper that came out of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society here at the Chan School earlier this year. I think it was this year, maybe it was late last year. That looks at what happens when a judge finds for one of the increasingly large number of civil suits making their way through the court system? Do they have any kind of recourse beyond legal damages? Could they potentially have some sort of framework, a public health framework, to respond in the same way that we've seen some responses, I would argue ill responses with tobacco, with asbestos, for example. But how do you take a public health lens to that? And I think there's some work to do that's at that angle, and may be the instrument that's maybe most available, and in some ways at the structural level.
We're going to go to Fede and then David, and then I think back to Rich on the panel for final thoughts.
Actually, after Ashka, I think I have a very similar question, and I do wonder, like, if we can kind of address the problem at the root, because we know how social media is detrimental to our social fabric. A determinant of health and happiness is human connection and relationships, and in-person relationships. So do we really need to use this tool that is so detrimental to get a message across, or rather to improve the mental health of the population that we are talking to? Can we meet them in person? Can we go to the schools? Can we use influencers to talk about the dangers of social media? I know it's kind of a dog biting its own tail, but like, about the dangers of spending so much time rather than connecting with each other. Can we be more creative about solutions rather than using the very tool that is damaging our society and our youth?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it. Amanda, go for it.
No, I was just going to say that one of the most popular briefings for creators that we did last year was aimed at parenting creators, and the topic was social media and mental health. I think there's actually a lot of hunger for this out there. I do think that is a topic and a way that we can. To me, I'm not so interested in platforms come and go, right? Some of them are great, some of them are terrible. Like, I lived through Vine, the life and death of that, for example. I think that, TikTok is with us right now. The algorithms are punishing in many ways. But I think creators are like digital community leaders. And so I separate them a little bit. And I do think that they have to be part of a solution, at least in the world that we live in right now. We can't undo.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, this is where people, particularly young people, are getting their information. So if you just withdraw from it, then you're just sort of leaving it to the, to those that are there. I think you have to engage.
And I think we've seen this a little bit with Twitter X. Like, I think a lot of sort of like left-leaning organizations, people have left the platform, but now, there's still millions of people on the platform, but all the information they're getting is sort of right-wing information. And
I'm still there.
Arguably, we should all still be on those platforms, though we don't obviously support anything Elon Musk does. And so I think it's always a push and pull between where people are and how you can take them out without, but you can't ignore where they are. And so how do you get them to where you want them to be? And I do think creators can be part of that solution.
Hi, this is a fantastic discussion. I have a public health background. I'm also a clinician. I want to follow up on Dave's comment about people feeling let down. I think it's really important to think about, legacy media being perceived as a defender of the status quo, and the TikTok culture being more challenging of the status quo. And, my disclosure is that I have a distrust in health institutions. I've studied nutrition under the commercial determinants of health framework, and have seen how food corporations have corrupted the science and affected how information is funded, produced, and disseminated, and also taken interest in the pharmaceutical industry. So really understanding the role of greed and corporations in quote unquote information and the evidence. So I might give off conspiracy theorist vibes a little bit, right? And I think people pick up on that, but it's really a systemic understanding of what people are calling evidence and what people are calling information. And I do think that those who believe in challenging the status quo are starting to catch on to this idea that the terms evidence-based, misinformation, disinformation are being weaponized, right? Because some of that information, the evidence, is tainted by corporate interests, right? And so I think a big part of the divide that exists is that there are people, like I said, that want to defend the status quo and say, this is the evidence, this is the information, and there's a growing group of people, and this would be found on TikTok influencers, some of whom I follow, that are actually challenging the evidence itself, the way that it was funded, the way that it's been produced, the way that it's been disseminated, weaponized, et cetera. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that the youth, people growing up, are starting to question how evidence is created and to question it at the deeper level rather than just quote unquote looking at the evidence. And so I know that that message resonates with a lot of people, myself included, and I think that that's important not to overlook in the shifting landscape of news and the dissemination of it.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways.
Can I step up to defend the mainstream media just a little bit, because a lot of what a lot of people know about all of this malfeasance has come from investigative journalism done by the mainstream media. It's not like the mainstream media has some, has some personal interest in continuing the status quo. I mean, there have been plenty of journalism prizes won for uncovering, what the tobacco industry has done and what the gun industry has done, and what pesticide industry has done, and what, big food and big pharma have done. That notwithstanding, my concern about this is that people now look at everything as a conspiracy, and they question everything, and I think that's as problematic as questioning nothing.
Well, I would also just add that, people believe what they want to believe. When I see studies pointing to drinking 6 cups of coffee being good for you, I'm like, yeah. And then I see studies, you can't drink red wine anymore because any small amount of alcohol is harmful. I'm like, oh, come on, that can't be true. They must have overlooked something. So I think, that goes to the beliefs of people and how can you kind of come to where people are and find out what their needs are, what their desires are, and how to engage with them in a way that's honest and truthful and looking at evidence as impartially as possible. For all of our bashing of RFK Jr., he does have a point about food dyes and food additives, so it's not all bad. So Amanda, maybe we'll take this time now to go to some final thoughts, and if you want to also address that last point as well. Why don't we start with you, Amanda? How can Nova Institute better kind of not just position itself, but engage with people through social media, do you think?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for any organization at the moment to think about who are aligned, what kinds of creators in these spaces, like what kind of journalists in these spaces are aligned with, your interests and your mission, and to think about how instead of trying to go it alone, that you do it in partnership with folks. In part, I think coming back to that last question, sort of like I think society is evolving its understanding of what is evidence, right? Not necessarily the way like a scientist would define it, but also that evidence, to a lot of people, to a lot of consumers, involves how their own experience with a health system, their own experience with wellness, right? And that sometimes institutions have traditionally, for many populations, devalued that personal experience. And so I think thinking about how you do that without embracing that sort of larger view of what people think goes into those decisions. So, that would be my closing thought.
I think our goal, I would hope our shared goal over the next decade is to rebuild trust and to rebuild trust in truth, and to appreciate expertise. I mean, I think everybody, that one of the things, the whole creator community is very much an equalizer, but everybody doesn't have the same amount of information. And I think that's an issue that we're going to have to grapple with over the coming, decade or so.
Yeah, I think to sort of add to that, but also address your comment, I think we've sort of generally always had a shared reality. Like, we've always had sort of a broader shared reality. I don't think that's true anymore. I think the algorithms and the platforms can give you a specific reality. And so I think as we think about the next decade, we should think about building trust, and we should think about like how close can we get to like one shared reality. Because I think it's hard to be in community when people's everyday or people's reality is fully different from someone else's. And so how do we start at the same baseline, I think is like our biggest challenge.
So I'm hoping that Ashwath and Julie, you can stay for lunch. People, I'm sure, would love to have informal chats with you. Amanda, sorry you can't join us in person, but I want to thank tremendous panel, great food for thought for the NOVA community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.